Hello and welcome to the Nutritank podcast, where we interview leading experts within the field of food systems, nutrition, and lifestyle medicine. Our aim is to empower you, the next generation of healthcare professionals and change makers. We believe that the valuable knowledge and experience of our guests will inspire you to act and join the movement in creating a healthier population.
Hello everybody, Luke here, Nutritank member and nutrition student. We hope you enjoyed the previous episode where my co-host Ian interviewed the lifestyle medicine celebrity and triathlete GP Dr. Hussein Al-Zubaidi. It's a brilliant discussion where Ian and Hussein cover how healthcare patients can build healthy lifestyle habits for themselves and their patients, and the lessons he's learned throughout his inspiring career. Do give it a listen if you haven't already. In this episode, I'm speaking with the inspiring Sophie Trew. As a breathwork coach and holistic mentor, Sophie works with clients to support their health goals and empower them to realize their body's self-healing capacities. Sophie has worked in the integrative cancer space for 6 years, running workshops, talks, and events. Previously a trained journalist, her entrance into the world of holistic health came from her own experience with blood cancer in her early 20s, where she used an integrative medicine approach in her recovery. Sophie is trained in transformational breathwork, meditation and mindfulness, EFT and matrix re-imprinting, NLP, Thai massage, and Reiki. Now, I'm just going to add a little disclaimer here written by the Nutritank team. In this episode, we do discuss a range of complementary medicine practices that Sophie has used alongside her conventional treatment. We also discuss an array of well-known evidence-informed lifestyle medicine practices that Sophie utilizes regularly that supported her through her treatment, post-recovery, and now in her day-to-day. Here at Nutritank, we're dedicated to gaining the patient's perspective on their health journey and to understand what led them to choose their treatments, what works for them, and is helping them personally. Now, this doesn't mean that we're promoting all complementary forms of therapy. We strongly encourage our listeners to bring a degree of caution and curiosity to any self-guided complementary practices and remain open-minded and non-confrontational regarding the choices individuals make when it comes to their own health, provided that it's not harmful. It's always best to critically appraise what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and disclose these to your medical practitioner to check their safety and risk. And with that being said, let's dive into the chat. Okay, well, welcome to the show, Sophie Trew. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And I think it's worth me kind of expressing a little bit how we first met. So it wasn't too long ago. I was at the IPMC 23 conference, which is an amazing place. And I'm lucky enough to volunteer there as a student helper. Kind of holding up timesheets and running around with microphones for all the speakers. And I was just, you came on for about 10-15 minutes and did like a group-led breathwork session, and it took the whole conference into another dimension, basically. I'm not trying to say it was an altered state or whatever, but it made it, we were learning a lot. It's a very heady place, and it made it experiential all of a sudden. And it was such a quick, almost... you wouldn't imagine that the switch could occur that quickly, but it really did take it into a different place. And so that was amazing. And then I came and approached you later on and we had a bit of a chat. But yeah, what was your thoughts on that conference?
First of all, thank you for the timekeeping. It's always an essential moment, isn't it? When you're kind of on a roll, but don't know how long you've got. And I thought the conference was awesome, really, really inspiring, and just such a incredible depth and breadth of people who were there and exhibitors and stuff. So yeah, and really interesting to see the range of topics and I guess the evolution into kind of talking more about, there was so much on the mind as well, as opposed to kind of more... There was nutrition based, but it was really a lot. I felt I wasn't there as much as you were, but a lot on the kind of psychology side. Interesting to see the psychedelics being quite a key part as well. So that was great.
I mean, just to touch on the psychedelics being there last year as well, it was interesting. We've kind of changed from a much more tentative approach with that to something that felt a lot more kind of confident, and that there are a few more speakers and things are beginning to shift, but maybe we can talk about that later on. And kind of doing a little bit of research, I've kind of heard you split your life into 2 parts almost. So you say BC and AD, so before cancer and after diagnosis. So I think it's sensible to start off a little bit with that BC period before cancer. And yeah, I'd just love to hear about your life before cancer and kind of what was the journey into your 20s like? Where do you grow up and stuff like that?
Yeah. Okay. You're going to take me back. Take me back a decade. So where did I grow up? I grew up in a bit of a madhouse. So I'm one of 5 kids, and we also had about 50 animals. I think that was the maximum at one point. So surrounded by dogs, 9 cats, sheep, pigs, a bit of a classically dysfunctional, let's call it, household. And so that was in the countryside, about an hour south of London. And then into my 20s, to jump forward to that. So I studied journalism and Spanish at university and wanted to be Louis Theroux's sidekick. That was my mission, to go into documentary, and interviewing people had always been a thing that I'd done from the age of kind of 9. I'd interview my parents' friends, and I was always ultra curious. Probably that annoying kid with all the questions. So then wanted to evolve more into radio and production. And the BC part, I was studying at Sheffield, which was awesome. I loved it. And then after uni, was spending a bit of time in Paris working for a paper. And then I made a documentary in Colombia, which was a very fortunate opportunity. I applied to get a grant and got funding to make this film in Colombia. So 22-year-old me goes off to Colombia with slightly limited Spanish, with this grand ambition to make a graffiti documentary in Bogota, which those moments in hindsight was pretty ambitious to do. And so spent a few months out there making that and filming the urban art scene in Bogota, which is amazing in Colombia. And yeah, so that's just my final moment, BC. Living a fairly hedonistic lifestyle and classic kind of recent graduate, I guess. Always on the go, always living in my head, as you said about the conference, kind of taking in so many different things, but really disconnected from my body as well.
Yeah, well, I think before we jump ahead to kind of what sparked a lot of change in your life, I think it's worth exploring. How do you? Yeah, you mentioned, you've spoken a little bit already, but how do you relate to that version of yourself? Just from your descriptions, you're clearly a very ambitious, adventurous, and curious person. How do you relate to that version of yourself?
That's a good question. I think when something happens in our life that causes a lot of change, it can be an interesting process to then reconnect to the person we were back then. But now I just feel there was a lot of innocence back then. So there was a lot of that kind of, I guess, freedom. And I'm really interested in a therapy called internal family systems, which is kind of all about all of our internal parts and internal characters. And so those parts of me back then are definitely still a feature. And I've still got that kind of inner rebel and the ambitious one. And it was them finding a way, I guess, in the healing process to bring all of them together. And yeah, I look back very fondly on all of those days because it was a lot of fun. And all of the years, I'm kind of one of those people that a lot of people say, I didn't like school, I didn't like this, I didn't like, went to sixth form college, and I loved every minute of it.
So yeah, we were just talking about reconnecting those, or just like trying to find a connection with those parts, the parts that maybe it's tempting to look back, and you have said a couple of times it was hedonistic and you were living in your head and it was kind of and not outside of your body. But I think there's, with that internal family systems, you're framing it in a positive way where it's just like parts you want to welcome and kind of integrate into the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking back just fondly on all of the different times, and as I said about the kind of innocence as well, there was a lot of different freedom probably that time allowed, because I wasn't thinking about certain things, and yeah, a lot of lightheartedness probably around it too, but was definitely very driven, quite ambitious, and probably a bit of a high achievement orientated person, which again, I guess we can trace back to different things. But yeah, no, I loved all of it.
Amazing. And then of course this big shift does come, this kind of, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So then when I came back from Colombia, I started to get some different symptoms and kind of put it down to, there's an article, a really terrible article in a newspaper that says graduate who thought she had a hangover actually has cancer. And I don't even remember saying that I thought I had a hangover. But I was getting things like night sweats and fatigue, and I would wake up in the night and it would just be drenched as well. It was a bit like that. I'm really low energy, and my mum's a physio, and I went to see a chiropractor with her just to be a body, doing a massage demonstration. She was learning a different technique, and he said, there's something wrong with your breathing. And at the time I was asthmatic, so I've always had a challenge with my breathing up until cancer, when I kind of changed everything. And he said, there's something wrong with your breathing. And I said, it's probably because I've got asthma. The day after seeing him, this lump started to grow on my neck. And I remember saying to Mum, you need to get on the phone to this guy. I can't believe he's kind of caused this giant lump. And what had happened, it seemed like these kind of toxins had just moved up, or one of my lymph nodes, which is where I had the cancer, had just grown. And it was incredible. It just grew and grew and grew. And I was still going out in London, still planning on doing a new job with a newspaper. And luckily I saw him because he moved something up. I had 2 on my chest and 1 down in my spleen, but it was amazing. I feel very grateful that we did go to see that guy beforehand.
Wow, I hadn't realized that you kind of attribute that to the chiropractic, that these kind of toxins had moved up. What do you think would have been the case if you hadn't seen that chiropractor?
I know a lot of people are diagnosed in A&E, a lot of young people, because maybe the symptoms wouldn't be recognized. And I did have a long time with them trying to work out what it was. So a lot of misdiagnosis. And I think inevitably when you've been somewhere like Colombia, there was the thought that it might be tuberculosis. So I don't think it would be toxins, but I think he moved something, and I don't know what. So something appeared the day after seeing him, which is weird. And
so that grew, and then you eventually received a serious kind of cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with lymphoma, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and very, very quickly was kind of accelerated from that lifestyle that I was talking about to being told that I needed to start immediate chemotherapy, and kind of was then part of that hospital system. I had 6 months of chemo. So it was pretty back to back, and a massive change of just everything. It felt like everything had just been flipped on its head.
And I mean, there's something in the way you describe it there, which is you were just started on this course. Did you feel like a passenger at that time? How much did you feel informed about what they were saying? Did they kind of fill you in? What was the message to you?
Oh, I absolutely felt like a passenger. I also think the shock, that kind of moment of taking in such shocking information, we're not really able to process too much. So I wasn't really able to process very much. I remember us having our initial meeting, and they said, you need to bring your parents with you. So I kind of knew it was a big chat. And they said, and I just remember the questions. So it just shows everyone's values. My mum said, will she still be able to go on holiday at some point this year? And then my dad was like, will she be able to have children? And my question was, am I going to lose my hair? So it was kind of those levels. But in terms of feeling informed, no, there were a lot of gaps. And that's kind of then when I started to empower myself and start to really, and particularly, and I know that you're studying nutrition, particularly around the nutrition conversations, when I started to realize some of those things, there was a lot of eye-opening moments.
Are you a healthcare professional looking to elevate your knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle medicine? Nutritank CIC wants to empower you to have the communication skills and knowledge of lifestyle medicine to improve your patients' health through free CME accredited webinars hosted every Monday evening. Learn from leading experts in the field and gain access to cutting-edge research and best practice. Here's what you gain through our webinars. Enhanced knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle medicine and applying it in clinical practice. Continued medical education credits to maintain your license. And free access to a library of previously recorded high-quality educational webinars. Take action now. Register for upcoming webinars or become a member at nutritank.com. The links will be provided in the show notes. Invest in your clinical practice and patients' well-being and fuel their health with Nutritank CIC.
Wow. And I mean, yeah, I guess when in the movies, when these kind of, for anyone who hasn't had a family friend or themselves gone through a cancer journey, in the movies, when someone gets a diagnosis, usually everything slows down, emotional music pours in, but actually sometimes it can, from what you're describing, it's a bit more kind of, yeah, you step back and things start kind of happening before your own eyes. But then what's remarkable about your story is that there is this shift to kind of a proactive approach. Was that instantaneous? And how did that happen? I mean, yeah.
I would say it was an evolution after the first couple of chemos. So it kind of felt like adulthood was just beginning. I was kind of in this exciting time, and then suddenly I'm this kind of patient situation, and the treatment was really, really, really grueling. I really struggled with it. It made me really sick. And the more that, then there's this kind of, it shows again the power of the mind and the power of placebo, because when I started to know that I was going for treatment, I kind of get this anticipatory sickness. So I did go through a few cycles, kind of numbing myself. I was given sedatives and I was given sleeping pills. So I was quite numb for a little stint of that. And then things started to trickle in. So I think I was introduced to acupuncture by someone. I think on the ward there was a Macmillan Centre and you could access complementary reflexology, and connected with a homeopath who had supported the family many years ago. And as people started to kind of drop these little seeds, I was open to it. And I think my journalism, kind of journalistic mind would always, again, the questioning, that's where I went. And on reflection, maybe it's a coping mechanism. Maybe that was my way of getting through it, that I did then start to take a very proactive approach. And I'd look around and, for example, Burger King was the main restaurant in the hospital, the only thing that you could access. And there were just all of these gaps. And at that point, I was told just to keep eating what I was eating, to keep doing what I was doing. And no one actually asked what I was doing. No one asked about the lifestyle factors. There was all this talk of, so what illnesses did your grandparents have, and what all of the genetic conversation, but no conversation around kind of epigenetics or how I was living, or even some of the factors. Lymphoma is very connected to toxicity. It's maybe through pesticides. I think I said earlier, I grew up near farmland, so there was a lot of exposure to different things as well. So there were just gaps, and there's the kind of saying that empowered patients do have better outcomes, and that was something I realized quite early on. And not all of us want to do it, but it does make such a difference when we are informed. But yeah, back to your question, I was not informed very much of different things.
I think, yeah, there's a couple of things that struck me there. It's almost like, would you say the doctors or the kind of clinical support you were getting at the time, it was focusing on all of the things that were out of your control in a way? So like these things that had happened in the past, this genetic factors or certain, these things that were out of your control. And so when they asked you these questions, there wasn't something that you could respond to. There wasn't a level of agency there.
100%. And also I think that's where the disempowering element comes from, because as mentioned, with that power of placebo, or knowing that you're doing something to support yourself, whatever it is, makes such a difference. And yet that's kind of taken away when you're told nothing you're going to do is going to make a difference. I was told quite a few times, it's all a lottery. No reason why you got it. Keep doing what you're doing. So that was the kind of messaging that was coming in. And it was quite difficult because I was treated on a teenage cancer ward. So all of the people that you're treated with are also told the same thing. So then you're kind of more of that black sheep who's starting to question as you move through the process.
You mentioned that you became a part of this hospital. How much of a kind of cancer community did you feel a part of? Did you feel a part of a group experiencing similar things, or?
I found it quite tricky because everyone's going through cancer very differently. It's such a unique experience, and everyone has different side effects and different ways of dealing with it. So I kind of, my community sense came probably afterwards, and when I connected to places like Penny Braun and Yes to Life and all of the awesome kind of integrative support, I kind of felt, oh, wow, that's a little bit more resonance of where I feel like there's some shared interests maybe of the things that I was doing. But I would just kind of get into the chemo room, put my headphones on and zone in on in those times. And also because you feel so sick and quite rough that it's quite challenging to even be present on those days.
And so, yeah, when you did make it out of those first couple sessions of chemotherapy and you did realize, yeah, okay, I'm going to start being a bit proactive with this, start asking a few questions, and you did have that input coming in. You mentioned homeopathy and kind of couple of other different complementary approaches. How did that recovery plan begin to form? Was it always a plan?
I noticed massive shifts, and there's always that classic thing of how do you know it works? What's the evidence? I always think the evidence is in the people. I noticed such big shifts in my recovery after the difference between the first few cycles of chemo when I wasn't doing anything to then as I moved through the 6 months, massive shifts. And in terms of, and a lot of people talk about this, in terms of kind of less side effects, I remember feeling or thinking I felt healthier than I had done in ages because of, you're adding in more nutrients, you're doing different therapies that you may not have otherwise have come across if you are doing those. And so it does make a big shift. But in terms of the recovery, I'd say the real healing really began after all of that. It was kind of when the hospital ended, that was that moment of going, oh, wow, that was quite big. And emotionally processing everything after that, because I think when you're in the hospital system and you're going to all the appointments, it feels like, in a really weird way, it's almost like the thing that you're most afraid of becomes your safety net. And then when you step away from that, and then there's that kind of, oh, I won't swear moment. That's when the healing work began in terms of my recovery, was post treatment.
Mm. And so when that course of treatment was over, would you say up until that point, it was kind of tunnel vision? Like it was like, this is my objective right now. I've got to get through this period. And then it was about integration and kind of working it out with your real life.
Yeah, 100%. And because there's such a focus and, you're ticking off each chemo and moving into this. And then when that ends, there's that stopgap of, oh, what do I do now? And everything's kind of going back to normal, but I definitely don't feel normal. And that's that kind of shocking time. I think probably it's a bit like grief for some people when someone they love has kind of died and then they're planning the funeral and planning everything. And then afterwards, everyone kind of drifts back off to their lives and you're kind of left going, oh, what just happened? Yeah, it's probably a bit like that.
Yeah, everybody knows their stations. It's like, okay, this is what I've got to do to get to this point. And then when you remove that, that's when some of the most challenging parts arrive. And I mean, you've kind of mentioned it there that it wasn't as simple as a recovery process, but or a recovery discrete period. But how long did recovery take?
That's it's an interesting one because I feel like it's actually surprisingly long. It is a bit of a process. Maybe even 3 years, maybe even in terms of physical recovery is one thing. So I remember looking back in the mirror and not recognizing myself at all in the final few weeks of the chemo. And I wrote in a journal, this was very hazy journal after everything. And it just said, it feels like every cell in my body is dying slowly. And in essence, that is what was happening. And so physically, a lot of my muscles were kind of half the size. And I could tell because standing would be quite difficult at different points as well as the chemo progressed. So physically, it probably took about 8 months, but mentally, emotionally, it takes a while. And just that ability to have certain side effects. So it's irrational, but there's rational behind it, but kind of a headache. And I go, oh my gosh, it's in my brain, or pain in a rib. And I feel like it's in my rib. It's just all of those things that happened. And I started to notice I wasn't reacting to the same things probably after a year or two, but really breathwork and meditation, when I really found those and used them properly, that's when the big shifts came for me. That was the kind of turning point of, actually these tools are what really resonate. And I think everyone has a different tool. Some people love Qigong. Some people really focus. I think initially we do really focus on nutrition if we choose to and we want to. A lot of people say it's so split, but some people don't want to change their diet because that's where they get their enjoyment. And that, again, is so key, because if you get nourished by food and if it brings you pleasure, that's also great. I guess it's finding what a balance might be for you. So I did start off with the food, but then it kind of became this area of control, or lost a lot of enjoyment with what I was eating because I was too focused on thinking. And again, the mind, digestion, gut connection of thinking of what I was eating and the impact it was having, and that became quite tricky. So when I found tools that were a bit more about kind of the nervous system and rebuilding safety, and really, I think inevitably, I think there's a really high level of PTSD when you do go through cancer, but any chronic illness where you're in the hospital a lot. And so that was the thing that really shifted that for me. So it's a long recovery process, but I say a few years. There were times that I would wonder if I would wake up and I wouldn't think about cancer. And when you are also in that space or in that community, that you're inevitably surrounded by it quite a lot. And I would say, I'd say when I was about 26, 27, I stopped thinking about it. I don't think about it anymore in relation to myself. So
Wow, I think you've really highlighted there that recovery is not a straight line. It's not getting over a common cold or something like that. And you've mentioned a lot of the pillars of recovery that can be useful, can be applied to different people. I mean, I think it's important to touch on something you said earlier, though, as you were kind of breaking down the different stages of recovery. You said physically, you recovered a lot quicker than you did kind of mentally or emotionally. Did you feel supported by a healthcare system to recover mentally and emotionally in the way that you were physically?
no, unfortunately not. I don't think there is that support. I did work for a charity briefly afterwards, and I think the waiting list for emotional support was about 3 months, and I think now it must be a lot more extended, probably 6 months, a year, I'm not sure. So no, that support wasn't there. There were charities and there are people kind of doing amazing work, but I think the mental emotional side it's not as spoken about. There's more of the kind of physical rehabilitation, exercise, nutrition. But no, the PTSD side is a big one, and I know a lot of people who have lived with that. It's ongoing.
I mean, just quickly, do you think that lack of acknowledgement that that's an important thing to do, perhaps within the mainstream kind of medical thing, creates a cycle in which patients doubt that they even need it themselves? That sounds like quite a dangerous potential. Yeah.
Definitely. It's often an afterthought as well. And sometimes, because I now work in that space, often people will think, I'll do the diet, I'll do the exercise. That feels like a good thing to kind of control or manage. But the other stuff, dealing with the beliefs or the thoughts or some of the inner workings, can feel really challenging or edgy. So it's harder to go there. But we know when we look at things like the book Radical Remission, for example, most of the factors that a lot of people who go through a cancer experience have in common, who maybe go on to thrive for whatever period of time that is, I think out of the 7, or if there's 9, I'll have to check on that, but only 2 of them are nutrition and physical related, and the rest are connecting to your intuition, releasing suppressed emotions, increasing positive emotions, all of those different things. And really, essentially, I think connected to this podcast, we heal in community. So having that community focus and feeling safe with people is quite a key one.
And I think, so yeah, coming back to those kind of pillars, I mean, you mentioned that meditation and breath work were really important for you. I mean, yeah, so what else, or kind of what were the key things you were discovering that could be a part of your recovery artillery or arsenal, if you will?
Anything and everything. I tried anything and everything, I think. I have made a comedy video about weird things cancer made me do, because I did explore a lot. What would I think was most useful? And again, maybe it's that curious mind of wanting to dip into all sorts. Most handy, and I should also say that a lot of these tools, because of the cost and the resources and it feeling like it takes a lot to heal. Yeah, at some levels, it really is costly when we think about testing and things. But some of the most supportive things that I did, for me, were free. They were kind of accessible. So making sure I was moving my lymph in whatever way that was, getting out in nature daily. For now, if I tell you some of the things I do now as my kind of cancer prevention, essentials, getting my skin on the earth somehow each day, a bit of grounding, my daily breathwork and meditation, and sweat. Make sure I sweat. Just making sure I'm actually like moving the blood, and I love rebounding. But if you don't have a trampoline, you can do that just jumping up and down or shaking, like a lot of somatic tools. What was supportive back then, and particularly when it comes to the side effects, definitely acupuncture. Needles. I love needles. They're so, that was amazing for neuropathy. I had really numb hands and feet after the treatment, and it just helped me to regain that sensation. And kind of hot cold therapy, so I'd go in cold water. That was quite supportive. And then probably looking at my gut is really key, and that is definitely an ongoing process. I do find that quite a challenge, the kind of microbiome, gut health impact, especially when you've had a lot of drugs and a lot of different antibiotics. It can be quite hard to navigate. So that's a key area, definitely gut health in the recovery.
Well, yeah. And all of these things kind of that might be part of an average person wanting to create a healthy lifestyle for themselves. There's all these additional complications when your health has taken such a big hit, and when your body is having to deal with things that are so alien to it, like whether it's chemotherapy or these antibiotics that you're talking about. And I think one thing that really characterizes you is this curiosity and this willingness to try. And I wonder whether you've gained any insight or perhaps advice for people who are a bit more reserved. I think some of the things you've been talking about have definitely been branded woo-woo or complimentary or alternative in the past. And so people who could perhaps really benefit from them wouldn't even consider going near it. How have you learned to navigate that, or what are some of your reflections on that?
Luke, there's a lot more woo-woo that I can share. I think David Hamilton recently wrote a book, Why Woo-Woo Works. I think we have a lot of, and I'm really interested in science too. I'm very interested in that, but I'm also interested in the spirit, and I'm interested in energy, and everyone has a unique energy. Everyone, you can tell sometimes who comes in a room by the way that they feel. Like, I'm very interested in that side of things and interconnecting the two. And I have worked now probably with hundreds of people who have had a cancer experience, or even done breathwork with thousands now. And I know that these things have had a fundamental shift. When it comes to maybe being skeptical or being a bit apprehensive, or it's a bit of an unknown space, I'd just say maybe give something a try and just see how it is for you. You might find, that's not for me, I'll move on to something else. But even the big elements for me is exercise, like moving my body. And so for some people that's doing that a certain way, for others it's different. And we heal in a place of relaxation. So for me, fundamentally, all of those things are really about how do I get to a relaxed state? Because for so long, I was living in that fight or flight, that not fear state, but not feeling safe. And that was something that breathwork helped me rebuild. Breathwork, it's not really far out. All it is your breath, and it's paying that attention with intention on the way that you're breathing. We're breathing 20,000 breaths every day on average, and most of them we're not aware of, and it can be such a grounding tool. So I think there's ways for these. We can be, for those that are open to it and wanting to explore more of the kind of spiritual, we could just call it connection to self or connection to something beyond, if people want to explore that. Otherwise, it's more of the kind of scientific elements of the breath, meditation, what it can do to our minds, to our physiology. It's kind of the crossover. I did run a festival for a few years. So when I finished working for the charity that I mentioned, and that was running kind of holistic workshops for women during and beyond their cancer treatment. And the festival I founded was the first Cancer Awareness and Holistic Health Festival. And this was back in 2017. I ran this for 3 years, co-created it with a friend. And I realized some of those perceptions that people had, obviously kind of knew they were in the background, I'd have friends' dads saying, "You still running that witchcraft event?" And really, the event just consisted of things like meditation and talking about breath and talking about the power of the mind-body connection. All of these things that amazingly, and going to the IPM conference, are very widespread now, but even a few years back, and even the work that Penny Braun were doing, people would think it was woo-woo. And I do think we have this, maybe due to the way that witches were treated, or this kind of very historic treatment to do with things that are a bit kind of out of the box. There's this kind of maybe fear towards it, or it feels a bit edgy, or we want to kind of shut things down. So I think, again, that's the beauty of the integrative medicine approach, or integrative approach of everything, that we're kind of linking all of it together, and knowing that I've seen people outlive all expectations due to what they were doing as well as. So people want to think, oh, it was the treatment. No, it was all of the other stuff that they were doing to support their whole environment, not just the tumor. So yeah, I've just now seen so much to support all of that yeah, the evidence is there, definitely.
Yeah, I think what you've come back to kind of again a couple of times through that is the kind of contrast of the different languages sometimes that we use. And I mean, people have described it as East versus West in terms of the healthcare attitude. And I think even how you said spirit or connected to yourself, I mean, some people could call that one and the same. I think often people can see themselves as opposing sides, but I think if work is done to kind of translate or try and bridge that gap in a way that integrative medicine attempts to, I think it can be a wonderful thing, and it can break down some of those barriers. I know whilst yoga communities and meditation communities are seemingly the least hostile places in the world, it can feel like quite a lot to step into that as someone who's had nothing to do with that before. So I think if we look for the kind of underlying similarities and underlying points of connection, it can be a lot easier.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far and learning a lot. For those of you who are new listeners, welcome. If you're finding this information valuable, I would love for you to consider joining our regular listener family. Just hit that follow button wherever you're listening, and you'll never miss a new episode. By the way, one of our main goals is to educate as many healthcare professionals as possible about the power of nutrition and lifestyle medicine. So if you know someone who might benefit from this information, whether it's a colleague, friend, or family member working in the field, please consider sharing this episode with them. Now let's get back to the show and dive deeper.
And I mean, so you've mentioned there True Fields Festival. Would you say that was the first time where it shifted from you trying to work out the recovery plan for yourself and then trying to present something that was able to help others significantly?
Definitely. And I do think there's something important about that when we've been through something. Often for some people, again, there can be that urge to go and do something with that experience. But from what I've learned, it's really important to make sure that you're well-resourced and kind of a bit more grounded, or not cleared, but you've healed a little bit of your stuff before going into that. So I definitely think the festival was that time. And especially as I moved through like a couple of years of doing it, definitely. And I would invite, when we have those things around, I think it's just having compassion for all of our levels of experiences and backgrounds as well. And again, I remember initially having that kind of frustration of, why am I not being told about nutrition, or why am I not? And again, just because, as you know, and as you're working hard with Nutritank, it's just not there. The education part isn't there. So how do we all work together to share that? And what I think is important, and what I would love to see more of, is just that element of the openness. And I think what's really exciting is hopefully more and more people in the health profession are doing this. But just that thing of, I don't know anything about it, but I've heard that it could help, and this person's good for that. That kind of signposting is really good. And also, if you think that something's a bit woo, would just ask, where does that come from? That kind of thing of, where's that linked to? Is there a particular person or teacher or thing in my life that might have triggered that? And also, when it comes to illness, there are some really far out stories, and they will be maybe blown out of proportion a bit, of people trying all sorts of different things, and then that gets clumped under kind of holistic health or alternative medicine and things. And yeah, I'm really that was what the festival, sometimes people said alternative, and it's not. I would never say this or this. It's just really bridging, as you said, that bridge to bring it all together.
And so what were your reflections during that festival process? What did the festival look like? And what did the festival look like, first of all?
So it was a bit of a crazy time. The idea came in, and within 4 months we put the first one together. So it was kind of an amazing effort of friends and family and incredible support system to make it happen. And there were kind of 3 main areas. There was music and comedy. Then there was the cancer awareness talk stage. So we had doctors and nurses, and there were kind of different people who'd been through cancer or were going through it themselves. And then there was the holistic health space. So the holistic health space, it's on a friend's farm. It's a really beautiful farm. We're under a kind of oak tree as one of the workshop spaces. And then a bit kind of off into another spot. And there were talks, meditation, breathwork. We had talks on psychedelics for healing. We had an ice bath. A mixture of all sorts.
And how did it evolve across the 3 years? What did you change? What did you keep the same?
We really kept the skeleton very similar, and then it was just a mixture of different speakers and workshops, and it was really special. I think what was unique about it maybe is it wasn't inside, it was outside. So that already has a different feel to it, being a kind of outdoor festival. And people were just enjoying themselves. It was just a lot of fun. And I think the image of cancer is this kind of, there isn't much energy or joy to it inevitably, but this was kind of an opportunity just to be in community and to learn and connect and to kind of feel hopeful, I guess, uplifted.
Amazing. And I think you had one planned for 2020, is that right? And then you kind of had to cancel it during COVID. And then, of course, 2021 was a bit of a strange halfway house. Looking back on it, is there plans to come back to it? Is there plans to create something similar?
Luke, it's a sore point that 2020 didn't happen. It was the first year that I was so organised and I had the lineup all sorted. And the day before lockdown, I printed off 3,000 flyers, and then lockdown. And it took me so long to be able to even move those flyers out the room. So then after that, I really focused on my own kind of therapeutic practices and really working more on evolving my breathwork skills and kind of facilitator skills and bringing in more of the kind of somatic therapies and those tools. So that happened. And so it's been a bit of kind of self-focused time on my own work. And I think hopefully, in a nutshell, we'll definitely do another one. It's just when. And I think it will evolve the form. It's definitely have to come back, but we'll see when.
Well, I look forward to going to that. And you mentioned there that you kind of took some time to build your own qualifications within that space. It seems like you've chosen breath work as a main pathway, and you mentioned other kind of somatic therapies. What did that pathway look like?
So as I said, I experienced many different modalities, and we all get ill or have life experiences for different reasons, inevitably, and everyone, no kind of one illness is the same, or for we can have the same condition but have very different experiences and needs in that. And for me, the more body tools, the more things that could keep me present were really key. As someone, again, who lived quite in her head, anything that could help me feel grounded was supportive. And it was just through experimentation. And then when I did the festival, I did a breathwork workshop. And it was then that I kind of discovered how powerful that tool can be, and the fact that this is just through, again, like I said, putting attention on the way that you're breathing or consciously breathing in a different way. It had huge shifts. I think my life before breathwork and after breathwork is very different. So there's big shifts there. I also was asthmatic from a really young age, so my breathing was a real kind of focus. And through chemo, I got lung damage from one of the drugs, bleomycin, and so had that. I was kind of taking my inhalers very regularly. I run most days, but I was taking an inhaler every time I went running. When I did breathwork and did some gut support, and I got rid of asthma. So in the process of healing from cancer, I also healed from however many long, kind of 18 years of asthma. And that was a huge shift. So I think the reason I went more into teaching breathwork is I just know how powerful it is.
And how did you train yourself up on kind of, are there specific qualifications that you can do or training programs?
Yeah. So a lot of people are training, probably similar to yoga. There's a lot of breathwork trainings. And I did one, which was brilliant. Went out to India, was fortunate to go out there for some of the training, and then also did it here. Yeah, amazing breathwork teacher. And then beyond that, have then added more to that. And I'm very kind of interested in how this practice can be trauma informed, particularly from what I said about the kind of PTSD side of things. And so I've kind of explored things like somatic experiencing, now very kind of into the IFS, as we mentioned, space. And it's always just an evolution of what tools can I add in to ensure that I'm offering or I'm supporting people in a way that's really the best for them. So I'm kind of always evolving the practice.
And I think there's something especially profound about the breath, in terms of how accessible it is. I mean, I think I was trying to think earlier today, is there any kind of practice that has less of a barrier to it? Of course, if you've got a blocked nose, that might change a few things. I mean, it's hay fever season at the moment, but I think there's something to be spoken for about that. And yeah, has that really affected how many people you can reach and how many different perspectives you can reach with this?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, you don't need anything. It is, and the difference that you can get from a couple of minutes breathing versus meditation is also huge. So we know that one of the quickest ways to regulate and bring about calm is by taking, so it's a kind of double inhale and a long exhale. And a lot of people say, they come to a session and they say, I can't meditate, my mind's too busy, I can't do this. And actually having something that you can focus on with the breathing can be really supportive as a focus tool. Yeah, it's definitely very accessible. And I think the difference is as people notice quite instantaneous shifts. You might feel sensations or things happening quite quickly, especially if you're someone who's a shallow breather. When you start to really open up and breathe more from your kind of diaphragm or have this deeper breath. So many people are holding their breath or shallow breathing throughout the day, and you will notice quite quickly the sensations happening if you're a shallow breather as well. So yeah, it's pretty rapid results.
And I can see you're kind of, from the way you've described it, you're kind of adding these different strings to your bow. There's lots of different practices, and I think with that comes being a kind of health entrepreneur in a way. And I think from what you were talking about before cancer, there's this kind of like hustle, ambition attitude. I wouldn't be surprised if as more opportunities come around, that life can get busy again and that you can kind of encounter the same things. I mean, how do you cope when things get busy and when the busyness does creep back in?
Again, great question, because I think we can often let some of our self-care aspects go. But what I make sure of is those daily essentials. So life does get busy, and especially if I'm, again, maybe people listening to this, maybe doctors, for example, and they've got a really high patient load. So I'm not going to say my kind of therapy clients or breathwork clients are similar to that, but it can be quite taxing, and really key is just a few minutes. It's just taking a few minutes out, or I like to think of it as snacks. Like, it doesn't have to be a massive chunk of the day. You don't have to go and breathe for 20 minutes. It can just be kind of 3 or 4 minutes. Or even we know that even the physiology, the changes come from even 3 minutes of meditation. So I'll just do that. If I don't have time for too much movement, I'll go for 5 minutes. And I do have my go-tos. I know that yoga nidra is a game changer for me. So if I feel like I need a bit of a reset, I'll even just do 10 minutes. I'll look for a kind of YouTube yoga nidra help. And I find that more of a switch off than breathwork. Those kind of things. It's just like the micro chunks of time. And I'm more embodied, so that makes a difference. Before I don't think I had any level of self-awareness or self-inquiry. I wasn't wondering, how's my body feeling in this situation? Is this tiring me? Am I feeling a little bit burnt out? I didn't have that level of awareness, so I wouldn't check in. And now I'm very much more, what's the sensation in my body in this situation? It's very much kind of checking in with my needs. Before, I don't think I had needs. I was kind of very self-sacrificing or just keeping going. So I'd push past those needs. Now it's a bit more needs focused.
Wow. And yeah, like you said, you've got that heightened sense of self-awareness, which you maybe wouldn't have even detected. I'm in a space where I probably need to take 5 or 10 minutes now and do this yoga nidra or whatever your go-to is. And I think that's one thing that's come up again within our conversation is this idea of go-tos. You're very accepting of the idea that what might work for you might be something entirely different for someone else. And we've just had earlier in the podcast series, we've spoken to Ali Jaffe and Ian, and we're talking about perfect medical practice, what a perfect medical training looks like. And Ali was like, we need a patient-centered dimension. We need a more person-centered approach in which the patient is the expert. We've got these expert patients, and it is about tailoring what works for them rather than this kind of top-down thing. So I think that's something incredibly important to realize and something that you've highlighted really well.
100%. And I also wonder, because that's also tricky on the medic side, how do you encourage that in people? Because that can be quite a challenge, can't it, of self-advocacy, or especially when people are afraid of their health, or there's, again, like levels of education and awareness and, the different systems as well. It's quite tricky to maybe encourage that.
Well, yeah, I think it's certainly worth saying that the kind of from speaking to GPs and people in GP training, when people come in, they're more expecting a pill rather than any kind of conversation. So I think this environment, it wasn't created in a day. It's kind of been this long shift when now we're at a situation where people aren't trusting their intuition, or okay, what do I think is wrong with me? Have I done enough of this? Have I done enough of that? It's more just like, okay, come on, take this problem and make it go away. And I think, yeah, your BC, your before cancer, it kind of, you mentioned you kind of disconnected from your head and a body. And I mean, yeah, I think that's really important as well. And so in some cases, people do need these really powerful moments, but I think it's a really important thing to explore. How do we shape the environment so that people are more open to that? They don't just want the pill.
Yeah, 100%. And then I wonder where those conversations even begin, because it's probably school. And I remember back in the day, and even in our family, it would be go to the doctors and there'd be that thing of, did you get a prescription for something? And it would feel like a disappointment if you didn't walk away with a pill. And that was that kind of level of awareness. And I even still came up against it with parents, when I started to kind of explore other stuff, there would be this, I remember hearing a mum saying, Sophie, stop asking so many questions. But, there was this whole thing of, yeah, but the doctor knows best. And obviously, yes, they do in so many levels, but not necessarily when it comes to what could really nourish you or make you feel good, or support your mental health through this situation. Or, yeah, you best. But I think we don't have a society, or maybe the spaciousness, to really get to know ourselves. So that's like a whole other thing of knowing what is health for me, what does normal feel like as well.
And I don't know how involved you are kind of with that medical community. I know you've done a lot of work with these kind of multifaceted environments. But I think it's worth mentioning that there is reason for hope. There's a shift happening. It might not be as fast as we want it to be, but through the works of people
Definitely.
like Ali and Ian, we are seeing like real curriculum change at medical schools. And I think we've got a lot of amazing research that is happening within these spaces that we're talking about, areas that are called woo woo. I mean, you've got nutrition and exercise and meditation and sleep, things that doctors used to have to kind of say under their breath. And it's a time of change. We're really incorporating that now.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I'm really excited for that as well. I think it's so key. And you notice it. I notice already like the shifts when I see different doctors. Obviously, you've got some of the older ones who are open. And then it's just, again, like anything, when we've gone through life and we've had so many decades, let's say, of certain belief systems or patterns, it can be quite hard to shift. So it's great to do that early on at school and things and on the courses.
I totally agree. And I think one of the big things we're advocates for here at Nutritank is the community element of that. And I think once you do realize that people are fighting for the same thing, your team grows. You join a much bigger team. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
We've heard a little bit. We're kind of coming on to the part of the podcast now. It's the kind of questions that we ask all of our speakers. And you've mentioned a little bit about self-care already and your kind of go-tos. Have you got anything else to say to our kind of audience of young healthcare professionals or students and change makers about kind of looking after yourself, whether it's,
I think there's a really big shift that can happen when we're kind of, and it's that kind of inner work of being a bit more on our own team, kind of like the internal voice. That was a big change for me of how am I speaking to myself? And again, maybe we need support with that, but that working with the inner critic, again, so many people feel like they're not good enough or they're not enough, they're too much, or all of these internal voices. So the kind of self-care side of maybe developing a relationship with some of the ways that you speak to yourself, that kind of inner narrative can be supportive, kind of resourcing yourself, being well resourced with, and maybe something that helps you ground. It might be your breath. It might be just a kind of couple of minutes of centering or noticing your body, or anything that can be quite, the snacks that you can do when you're in those heightened situations, I guess. And nature, again, so many people probably say it, but having your kind of place in nature that you go to reset. I love bringing in the elements. So if there can be like a monthly cleanse, or you can get into open water or whatever you can do, I always find that quite supportive.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned snacks earlier, and I think from personal experience, even so going back to the IPMC, it's a very heady place, and we're digesting a lot of information, and I think it's almost imperceptible that you can find yourself kind of almost tensed up, and you're kind of just like concentrating really hard, lots of furrowed brows around, lots of vigorously shaking heads. And I was, I mean, I'm into breath work and stuff, and I was really surprised just at what 10 minutes did. I mean, you could feel a palpable change, and I could feel it within myself. So I think that really is testament to the kind of power of these health snacks that you're talking about.
100%. And I think that's when we can overwhelm ourselves, because we come back after a big day and we feel we don't even have much energy to think about what's for dinner. And I think so many people are struggling with that decision fatigue at the moment. And I read that on average, we make about 35,000 decisions a day. So when it then also comes to, there's this new kind of self-care thing I can do or whatever, just sticking with the basics of knowing that you don't have to go and do a half an hour thing. It can just be 4 or 5 minutes, and that will make a difference. Digestible kind of chunks.
Yeah. And I think one thing that it is important to kind of talk about whilst we are on the self-care topic is social media and its role within our self-care. I noticed from your social media, it's less of like, I'm going to make reels and I'm going to make viral videos that are about kind of helping people. That's not really your gig, but there is a lot of that in the healthcare space, and the self-care space. I wonder, what are your reflections on that? We've got a particularly young audience, whether they're young professionals, young healthcare professionals, or students. And I think our generation is particularly susceptible to those messages and those kind of self-care posts.
Do you mean in the sense of people giving information that maybe isn't kind of backed up, or what do you...
Well, I think there's that, but there's also the sheer volume of it, and the amount of time we spend exposed to social media. And I think there's certainly a risk of overconsumption and over reminders that I need to be doing more self-care.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And then you feel guilty because you're not doing it. I think it's a tricky one of the way that we need to limit. I kind of see it as another, let's put it this way, addiction probably. And we all have our own relationship with our phones or with social media, and maybe kind of redefining again. So, because that's how we connect to everyone. And especially if maybe you're learning through that too, but for each individual to find a way to limit their usage is kind of key. Narrow your focus. If stuff's becoming overwhelming or you don't connect to whoever you're following or watching, maybe just you can do that kind of muting, or just make sure that you're really focusing on knowing that our health is also about what we watch and what we read. It's kind of key. I guess that just takes your own level of filtering to know, does this energize me or does this deplete me? Sometimes we're looking at something and it can make us feel a little bit uneasy or not the best inside. So it's just knowing, how do you feel after scrolling and doing those things? But it's definitely a tricky one, and it's something that I find myself doing. It's that kind of just going through thing to thing. Yeah.
I think it's difficult when it's not seen as an overly negative thing. I mean, there's so many positives that do arise out of it, so much connection that does happen. So it is difficult to kind of disentangle this unhealthy addiction with something that also presents a lot of opportunity. But I think one thing that you said there about narrowing your focus, I think certainly in my experience, it's much more tempting to do lots of things at once than it is to really commit to just a few things. And I mean, you say you've got your go-tos, and I think that shows a level of commitment. I mean, I'm sure you had to experiment to find out what they were. But I think that's a really helpful piece of advice and something that certainly worked for me.
I think it's developing. It's also how you just develop that relationship with yourself over the years of knowing what works for you. Like, again, who works for you, like the friendships, the way that you kind of create your life, you'll know what really is supportive. I've tried so many different random things, and always you just kind of go back to the basics. And it doesn't have to cost the earth, although inevitably if we do want to do kind of therapy or other things, that can be supportive. So that's a different thing. But these tools are there for us. It's just going back to the way that we used to do things, the way that we used to live, where it was, and I think the living on screens, it's just not how we were made to live. So taking time out from that can be key. What do you think? What do you think with the social media stuff?
I think we're almost crash test dummies, our generation, in a way. I was probably the first generation that had most of my friends had a Facebook account at the age of 10 or 11. And I think when something that unknown and also incredibly can be addictive, probably was for me, is inserted into our lives at such a young age and kind of woven into the fabric of how we exist with one another socially, I think it's bound to have some knock-on effects. And I think more and more people my age are just like, I need to delete social media. And I think that comes from, it's a serious event where you're just like, this really is not healthy. And it's almost, it's spilling into the unhealthy zone. So I think it's interesting. I don't have all the answers. I'm aware that a lot of people have better relationships with it than me. I think I needed to delete it to actually just kind of get free from it, whereas some people are a bit more take it or leave it. And so I think, again, it comes back to that individuality. But it's certainly something that we're not prepared for. Like you say, we haven't evolved to live on our screens.
And I think also the attention span side of things. I'm shocked at the way I'd like to think of myself as someone who's very present with people, and in social interactions, sometimes, not if I'm kind of out and having dinner with people, but when it's the in-between, you're in a coffee shop or you're meeting somewhere and there's the option to have your phone at certain points, and that it's kind of like you're also meeting with your phone. It's a very weird experience now, and I think it can really impact our ability to retain information or keep our attention. And there's probably kind of 3 months of, not 3 months of the year, but a good chunk of the year that would be supportive for other projects or activities or even relationships that we spend online, which is, a strange situation.
I think something to keep an eye on is dumb phones. I think they're kind of making a resurgence. My older brother is after basically a phone which just does all the basics that you need and is unglamorous and unsexy as possible.
Your Nokia.
Yeah, your Nokia bricks. But it doesn't, it's not an easy transition, I'm sure. And you've got to work out how social media works with all of that. And I think just whilst we're still on this kind of self-care section, I think, have you got just like one video or resource that people can go to and just like have a 5-minute breathwork session for someone who's never done breathwork before? What would you recommend?
I feel like I need to make a video now. There are so many different, we've been using these breathing techniques across cultures for thousands of years. So there's, for every different situation, there's a different breathing technique that can be supportive. And some people like it energizing, some people like the whole Wim Hof method, other people that's too stimulating, other people like more kind of down regulating. It's hard to say one particular place, but I'll make a short breathwork intro on my Instagram, and then
fantastic. Well, people can definitely check that out. That'd be an amazing thing. Yeah. And so our community is primarily young healthcare professionals, healthcare students, change makers of tomorrow. What's one strength you think is important to cultivate kind of coming into this integrative healthcare space?
Also, I love this community as well. I love the change makers, as you said, and young health professionals. And I really think that's where like the hope lies as well, doesn't it? The shift. And it's an exciting time, as you said. Maybe openness and flexible thinking, but I feel like if you're coming into that, you're going to have that anyway. So,
or just let's say all healthcare professionals and healthcare students. I mean, we're all making the healthcare system, yeah.
Maybe it's that whole thing of take a little time to nourish yourself so you have more to give. Not to give, but you actually feel like you're kind of also supported. And just know that you're doing a great job, because there's always going to be people telling you otherwise, or like complaints or whatever. But yeah, you're part of an important system, I think.
Fantastic. And then, just to kind of finalize, have you got one resource that you can recommend to our audience that can learn a bit more about something within all of these things that we've been talking about today?
I think if you look up breathwork, you'll probably find different resources, and maybe the person or whatever comes up will be the thing that resonates for you. Because I couldn't pinpoint, there's so many different avenues, but I couldn't pinpoint one set thing.
Okay, amazing. And I think that kind of speaks to this idea of it's not a one size fits all, that thing that we've been coming back to today, and that there is that element of you need to trust yourself, you need to trust how you respond to these things.
100%.
Well, Sophie, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an amazing discussion.
Of course, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, share it with your friends and family and drop us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Don't forget to follow the show on your favourite streaming platform and connect with us online to stay up to date with all the latest news and episodes. If you feel engaged with a particular aspect of today's show, then please comment on our social media posts for this episode. They'll be linked in the show notes. See you in the next episode.